All right, so today we're going to talk about Unit 4, which is the benthic environment. So we'll talk about the species that you'll find there and the different phyla of them. And then we'll talk about the different types of benthic environments and kind of what species you'll find there and how they're beneficial to the environment, and then kind of like what adaptations do species need to have when they're there. Okay. So first and foremost, we're going to go over the phyla that you'll need to know for this section. So you'll need to know the name of the phyla as well as what belongs within the phyla. And then what kind of adaptations and differences that they have versus other phylum. So the first is porifera, and porifera are sponges, and these are the only ones that belong in porifera. Then we have Cnidaria. You don't pronounce the C, it's just Cnidaria, or Cnidarians if you're talking about multiple of them. And that would include our coral, our sea anemones, and our siphonophores. So coral, sea anemones, and then also jellyfish. So jellyfish should be mentioned in there. Siphonophores are similar to them, but jellyfishes is also in that grouping. I don't know why that's not listed there, but jellyfishes are in Cnidarians. You should know that. The next three are ones that are similar, but we're not going to talk about. I can never pronounce the flatworm one, so I'm just not going to do it. And then Nematoda and Annelida. These are also other types of roundworms and segmented worms that you will find in the ocean. But they're just kind of like ones that you don't really see, so we're not really going to talk about them. The next is mollusca, or the mollusks. So that includes chitons, snails, bivalves, gastropods, lots of different kinds. And there'll be different kinds of those that you'll need to know. Also, cephalopods are a part of the mollusca group. Then we have arthropoda, or arthropods, which includes our crabs, shrimp, our lobsters, barnacles are all part of that grouping. Also spiders, but these are our marine arthropods. And then we have echinodermata, and so echinoderms, so echinoderms, echinodermata. That's our sea stars, which is in the picture there to the right. So we got two sea stars over here. Sea urchins and sea cucumbers are all within that group. And then the next most complex group after that is chordata. So we'll talk about that next. But that is also listed on here. The focus will be the bolded phyla. Those are the ones you'll need to know. All right, so let's talk about our first one. That's porifera. So porifera are sponges, and they're each individual cells that work independently of each other within a sponge. But they all do kind of the same thing. So they're going to eat by digesting on its own. They're not going to have a stomach or digestive organ. They all digest on their own. And then we have the fact that they are filter feeders, which you might know from SpongeBob when he like breathes in and breathes out, and it's like, I don't need food. It's because they do. As water passes through them, they will digest things as they pass through. And so they are carnivorous. Sometimes crabs and shrimps are caught inside of them. And because of that, they get decomposed, consumed, not decongested. Sponges can actually live up to 200 years and can get quite large. They grow constantly, and so the largest we've found is actually 10 feet, and so it's very, very old. They lack true body symmetry or organs. That right now doesn't mean a whole lot, but when we talk about the other kinds, it does mean a lot, the fact that they're different in that way, the other phylum. They reproduce sexually or asexually. The sexual way, they release both the types of gametes into the water column. They will fertilize in the water, and then they will settle and then make another sponge. They also can reproduce asexually by just budding, and another part of it just comes off the original. Like in the picture you see here, like one of them just buds from the other. That's just the asexual way. And lastly, they are wonderful water filterers. Water filterers. They can filter up to 50,000 times their own volume per day. That's like us drinking 900,000 gallons of water a day. Imagine that. Actually, don't, because you would die. Your kidneys would be like, I'm overworked, and you would die. But that is insane. And if I asked you which phylum of the phylum of Benthos are the best at filtering water, you would say Porifera, or you would say sponges. Okay. All right, on to cnidarians. So this is our corals, our sea anemone, and jellyfish. This phylum also includes hydroids, which are ones that are like jellyfish, but not really jellyfish. But there are 11,000 species. It's pretty diverse, but they all have a stinging tentacle, which you learned about in your classwork bookwork, which is called a nematocyst. And that nematocyst is harpoon-like, and so it goes into the skin and latches on, and will then inject a toxin that is a stinging sensation. And so that can sting its victim. If you've ever been stung by a jellyfish before, you've felt that. It is not fun, but it is like a mini harpoon that goes inside, and those harpoon-like injections are called nematocysts, and the actual whole thing is called a syndocyte, or a nindocyte, actually, because it's like cnidarian. You don't pronounce the C. There are two basic life forms of our cnidarians. There are mobile parts of their life and sessile, and we call that Medusa, and then polyp. Remember the myth of Medusa? She can move around, but a polyp form cannot. It's sessile. Some live in one form as cnidarians, and then some live in both. It just depends. Like sea anemones live their entire life as a polyp. Jellyfish, on the other hand, will live their life in both. They'll start as a polyp, and then they'll mature into a medusa. And that might be blowing your mind right now. Like, wait, jellyfish start life like grounded, like the plant into the ground? Yes, they do. And I'll actually show you a picture of what that looks like on the next slide. They're a large food source for these species are fishes, sea turtles. They are a major food source for fishes, sea turtles, sea slugs, and starfish. They all consume them. But also they consume particles and fish themselves. So they catch it in their nematocysts and pull it up into their mouth. Or if they're flipped over and are a sea anemone, they'll pull it into their mouth like this, or coral. But they're within the same family. All right. So our polyp versus medusa stages. So polyp, when an animal is a polyp, so for example, our corals, they are like this picture here on the left. Their mouth and anus are one hole, and they'll bring in the food with their tentacles. A jellyfish, on the other hand, is like a flipped upside down version of the polyp, and its mouth and anus are on the bottom, and its tentacles pull things in from the outside up into the mouth. Polyp form is sessile, mouth up. Medusa form is free floating and mouth down. And I thought I had a good picture of this, but it looks like I don't. Essentially, the life cycle of the jellyfish is that it makes more polyps, or it makes more buds on top that look very similar to the polyp, but there's just a bunch of different tentacle layers on top. And then the top one, once it grows enough, because it grows from the bottom, it'll pop off, flip over, and become a jellyfish, which is kind of really cute, but interesting. So they can reproduce in both ways as well. They can basically shoot off an arm and create another one. They will bud another polyp, or bud along the polyp. Jellyfish will, or sea anemones, or corals. But they also can release gametes similar to the sponges, and have sexual reproduction that will add more genetic diversity to their gene pool, which is a good thing for reproduction long-term and evolution long-term. All right, our next group is mollusca, and this is the group that has three different This phylum has 3 different groupings inside of it that you'll need to know the names of and which ones are which. So they are the most large marine phylum that we have. So they have 50,000 species or more, and they are second in population size to arthropods. So arthropods in the world are the biggest phylum. They have the most diversity. They have so many different kinds because like our bugs are found in this grouping as well. But marine phylum, when it comes to marine phylum, the marine arthropods are not as in large numbers as the mollusks. So our mollusks, marine wise, are a larger phylum than our marine arthropods. Okay, so arthropods biggest overall. Mollusks are the second to them overall, but when we're in the water, mollusca are the most abundant. All right, 3 types of mollusks: gastropods, bivalves, and cephalopods. Gastropods are snails and sea slugs. So usually they excrete a shell on their back. They have a very slick bottom. Sea slugs are different. Sea slugs are very weird. There's a lot of different kinds. There's a sea bunny. There's a sea sheep. I'll show you pictures of those because they're actually really cute, but they're very weird. They're a very weird grouping within the gastropods. They don't necessarily always have a shell too. All right, bivalves are something that has 2 valves. So bi usually means 2. So it has 2 valves to it. And clams have 2 valves. So we've got clams, scallops, oysters, and then cephalopods are octopuses, squids, cuttlefish, and nautiluses. And these are in the same grouping with mollusks because they have some similar features. And we'll talk about that on the next slide. All mollusks have a well-developed body organs. So not like the sponges, they have body organs, and not like the cnidarians because they don't. They have a mouth and an anus separately, 2 different holes. They're more complex. They lack body segmentation, though. Usually all their organs are assembled into one giant like grouping in the middle. There's not like this goes here and the brain is here and this is over here. Like that's not how that works. So it's all grouped together in the middle of the body cavity. Oysters, out of all mollusks, are the most fished out of all the mollusks, but they're the second largest fishery actually in sea. They're really popular and they're really important to our economy and our environment. They filter 50 gallons of water a day and they remove harmful pollutants from the water. They also link nutrients from plankton to the bottom of the ocean or the benthos. So they're important in many different ways. So some things that our mollusks have. All mollusks will have the following 3 things. Bilateral symmetry. So if you cut them down the middle, they're going to look the same. They're going to 2-sided. So bilateral. They're going to have the same lateral sides. The second is a muscular foot. So they have a foot, kind of like a foot, that is full of muscle that they use for movement. So if you've ever seen a clam come out of its shell a little bit, that's its muscular foot. It looks like a tongue, but it's a foot. And then thinking of our gastropods, this is the muscular foot that they use to move for snails. They also have a mantle, and a mantle excretes their shell. So notice how this part of the snail here, it actually makes this shell. I know there's, stuff on movies and TV shows where snails can leave their shell. They don't leave their shell. They make it for themselves. And then when they die, then it, hermit crabs use it or other things use their shells, but they're the ones that actually make the shells. So they make a shell, clams, they make their outer casing, and actually cephalopods make a beak. So they have a mantle that is a membrane that surrounds the organs, and they secrete a shell. And so the cephalopod shell is their beak that they use for eating food. Most, but not all mollusks have a radula. A radula, these are our cephalopods and gastropods. And these are like the sharp scraping mouth teeth that they have. So this is the example of the cephalopods. And then this picture right here is actually a very, very close up picture of a snail's teeth that actually scrape as they will walk. And that's how they will consume food. So that is called a radula, and gastropods and cephalopods have them, but our clams, bivalves, do not. Gastropods, bivalves, they have shells. I talked about that. The foot, the muscular foot in cephalopods is actually modified to a tentacle, or 8 tentacles when it comes to octopuses, 6 when it comes to squid. Octopus and squid can move using a siphon. They'll suck in water and then propel themselves in a backwards motion. And then their radula is actually like their jaws or beak-like jaws. And then lastly, some mollusks have a very highly developed nervous system, like our cephalopods, and they are some of the smartest invertebrates. So they don't even have a vertebrae or a nervous system going down their spine. They don't have a spine. But they are one of the smartest creatures out there. And hopefully we'll be able to see that in some of the videos that we watch, Blue Planet and things like that. All right, our next group is our arthropods. So crabs, shrimp, lobsters, barnacles. The only one that doesn't really feel like it fits is barnacles, but it's the fact that it has an exoskeleton and it's made of chitin. So that's why it kind of belongs within the arthropod grouping. So this is the largest phylum on Earth. They have 1 million species, if not more. We're still discovering new types of insects daily. They are about 80% of the known species on the planet. So they are a huge grouping. Marine arthropods are crustaceans, like our crabs, barnacles, and lobsters. Also krill and shrimp. Crustaceans have an exoskeleton. They all have an exoskeleton made of chitin, chitin, which is a hard protein that is made, that they make. They excrete the protein. And as they grow out of that shape and grow bigger, they have to molt that exoskeleton and then regrow it. So when they're in that day or couple days post-molt, they are the most vulnerable, and predators will know that time of the season and take advantage of that time while they're a soft body. So that's a picture actually of it going on down at the bottom of the screen here. It's backing out of its shell and then going to create a new one. And then this is a picture of just how vastly different a lot of the different arthropods are. There are so many of them. And they're actually a really important food source for humans. So lots of people like crab, lots of people like lobster, and so they're among that. But they are filter feeders or scavengers. Our barnacles are filter feeders. Okay. All right, next group is our echinoderms or echinodermata. And so it's our sea stars, our sea urchins, and sand dollars. There are 6,000 species in this group. Echinoderm basically just means spiny skin. Derm, or the derma, means skin. If you ever heard of your epidermis. So derm means skin and echino means spiny. And so they have a lot of different spiny species within their group. The 3 of these groupings, echinoderm, arthropod, and mollusks, can actually be zooplankton in their larval forms, which we've talked about. I mean, as they mature, they settle into the water column and start to become a juvenile and grow bigger. Echinoderms are special. They can regenerate body parts. We've all seen, hopefully, or experienced when a starfish loses its leg, it actually can grow it back, which is kind of cool. Echinoderms actually have a very special vascular system. So instead of having blood, they have a water vascular system. And so they pump water within their body, and that water carries oxygen. They move that oxygen to their vital organs by using their tubed feet to suck in water and move it around their body by using pressure change. They actually don't have eyes, and some echinoderms actually will eject their stomach to feed. They'll like eject it out. Lots of sea stars do this. They'll encompass it around what they're eating, digest it, and then like slurp it back in, which is kind of gross. But it is a way that they've adapted for not having a very large stomach. So they'll eject it so they can consume. And then once it's liquid, they can get it into their body. Okay, this is a picture of the tubed feet. So tubed feet are really cool. They almost look like little suction cups, like little tentacles, but they're not. They suck in water and then they push that water around in this ring throughout their body. And so in the ring is where most of their organs are. That's why if they lose a leg, it's not a big deal. So they can push it around their stomach and their intestines. They can push it to the numerous organs that they have in their body that they need oxygen for. So they'll do that with their tubed feet. And also, sea stars have this, but also urchins have them too, and so do sand dollars. They also have tubed feet. All right. Now we're going to talk about the different communities within the benthic environment. So we've got sandy shore, rocky shore, seagrass community, and kelp forests. So we're going to kind of divvy those 4 up and talk about them individually. So sandy shore is the first one. It's probably the most common to you because they make up our beaches. I'm pretty sure that's a picture down here of North Carolina and one of our very pretty sandy beaches. But in general, the things that most impact this type of community is the next 3 things. So particle size, wave action, and slope. So particle size, meaning like the particle of the sand, whether it's super coarse or very fine, will change the type of animals that can live there and survive in that area. If it's very fine, then it's harder for animals to live burrowing in the sand and things like that. It's harder for water to drain through and it holds more water. So it's like different types of animals will live deeper in the water too. So it just depends. It's going to really influence the sandy shore community. Wave action, this controls erosion and sand movement. So generally in the summertime, we have a gradual slope and very calm wave action. And then in the wintertime, we'll have a stronger, more coarse sand, rougher beaches, rougher waves, and then a lot more erosion. So there'll be a steeper slope. So the degree of erosion and sand movement along the coast is obviously going to impact the sandy shore. And because of that, you're going to get different slopes going on. So if you've ever noticed going to the beach when there's like this big like drop in the sand and you can like, as a kid, you might have like jumped off it and stuff or like built in a chair into it or something like that. But that actually happens more often in the wintertime because there's rougher seas and more erosion. Okay. Continental shelves are most common for sandy beach communities. You've seen those questions on the tests up until now, so you should know this. And then also lots of organisms that are found on the beaches here are full of food and bacteria for organisms. So there's plenty of life living within the sand. The next is rocky shore. So they're not as common as sandy shores, but they're probably the next common. You'll find a lot of these more on the West Coast or northern regions. So they have a lot of animals that have ways to cling to this community as opposed to burrow. So they're going to be ones that have a lot of extreme adaptations for wave action and being more exposed to dry and warm temperatures. So they have shells most of the time. They have lots of times they'll have like a hold fast or something that can cling to a hard substrate. But they don't grow very very tall or very big. They're very small and compact, like barnacles and mussels and oysters, because they like that hard place to ground into the to rock. And then there's a lot of algae too that will live along the shore. And the last thing I'll say is that rocky shore communities are actually really beneficial to marine research, because as the water gets trapped in the rocky areas as it goes back out to sea, it makes these beautiful tidal pools that we can go up to and really fully experience many different types of species, because it's just like a mini pool there for you to research and study. So they're super beneficial for research. Comparing the two together, sandy shores, they burrow, rocky do not. There's a lot less protection from drying out in the sun than for rocky shore. They have lower predation, they have cooler temperatures, so they don't have to deal with some of the things that our rocky shores have to deal with. Notice if you've ever seen these bubbles on the beach, that's actually the gas exchange coming from some sandy shore species living in the sand, like clams, crabs, and things like that. So this allows for a lot of protection for them, and things like that. If you see on the right here, we've got gastropods and other species that are clinging, like barnacles, clinging to the side here, that are they'll have to adapt because they can't burrow. So they have to have shells and sun protection, wave protection. They don't want to be knocked off where they're sitting at. And then also, protection from predators like birds and things that have access to them when it's low tide. And lastly, for both of these, they're going to respire, so breathe. They're going to reproduce, and they're going to feed mostly during high tide, because they have more water for oxygen intake. They have more water for space so they can spread their gametes, and they have more water so they can consume plankton in the water column during high tide. Okay. Continue a little bit with sandy shores. Both can make tidal pools, more common in rocky shores, but there's some things that are limiting factors with our tidal pools, and that's going to be temperature, salinity, and oxygen. So temperature is going to be very rapid and dramatic changes, and so they have to be used to that and have some adaptations to deal with that. They have to be able to handle changes in salinity because of evaporation rates. And lastly, oxygen. In a tidal pool, you're going to deplete the oxygen eventually. So there has to be some ability to handle the harsh condition of not having oxygen at abundance all the time. So these are some things that they deal with in these places. All right, the next one is seagrasses. They are a plant. They are a flowering plant that live in the seawater. They cling to like a soupy mud or granite rock. So they like any kind of area, but mainly are more like extensive if it's a soft surface. So if something they can easily cling into, so like sand or mud or sediments and things like that. They like that softer bottom. They make a bed of a very highly organic content and highly anaerobic environment, but they have a very productive ecosystem. There's lots of things that hide within the grasses. They are found usually in shallow water, so they can produce a lot of photosynthesis, a lot of glucose through photosynthesis. They provide a lot of oxygen along with our phytoplankton to the ocean. And they actually can absorb 35 times this. They can absorb carbon 35 times faster than the Amazon rainforest. And they account for 10% of the carbon storage in the world, or the oceans. So they account for 10% of the ocean's carbon storage. But they only make up 0.1% of the ocean floor. So they do a massive amount of work, and they can support lots of different species. So for example, we've got dugongs there in the picture, but also lots of crabs and other species can live within the seagrass community. So they're one of the most productive ones in the world. They also are a good like check to see how clean and how healthy our waters are, because if they're growing there, that means the water's clear enough that they can get enough sunlight. So it's kind of a check system for us to know that, like, oh, like in general, the water is pretty good here. The ecosystem is healthy. Okay. All right. Lastly, we've got our forests made of phaeophyta, so kelp. They're in cooler regions. They like hard substrates to hold on to, and they're a very large brown algae. They are like a collective forest of a bunch of algae. They grow really fast, up to 18 inches a day, and they can be as high as 150 feet. And they have floats on them so that they'll stand straight up in the water column and be able to get access to light. Many organisms find shelter in this area: sea otters, sea lions, seals, whales, many different kinds. And we actually use kelp for a lot of things as well, like ice cream and gelatin and makeup, lots of different things. They don't have roots because they're not plants. Remember, these are protists. They have a structure called a holdfast that helps them secure to a rocky environment. They do not like soft environments, they like rocky ones. And they have these air bladders that hold them straight up, like I said. So let's look at their actual structure. So they have a holdfast, a stipe, a gas bladder, and then blades. And you learned some of this in the plankton unit, but they don't have a stem. It's like stem or trunk like. And then they have those nematocysts or pneumocysts, which are like floats that are filled with gases that keep them towards the surface so they can get sunlight. And then lastly, their leaf-like are called blades, and those are flat, and they're going to be very thin and flat and wide so that they can have as much photosynthesis going on per surface area. Okay, so that's what the kelp looks like. All right, so that's what kelp looks like, and they're super important for our environments, and they produce quite a bit of energy and some protection as well. All right, so I'm going to go through a few of our options here, and you're going to tell me on your own or think on your own what you think each one of these organisms is, what they fall under. So we've got sea star. What kind of phylum is this one? Echinoderm. Good. All right, what kind of one is this one? This is a jellyfish. Cnidaria. Good. This one, this is a snail. Okay, if you said mollusk, you're right. But I'm also looking for a more specific name, which is gastropod. Okay, so it's a gastropod and a mollusk. Specifically a gastropod mollusk. All right, what's this one? This is coral. Cnidarian, good. And this one, this is a barnacle, if you've never seen a barnacle before. An arthropod. What about this? This is a clam. I'm trying to make it bigger for you. It's a clam. Okay, gastropod, but it's also a what? It's got two sides, bivalve. What about this? This is a squid, mollusk, and cephalopod. What about this? This is a sand dollar. This is what sand dollars look like when they're alive. They're not white. The ones you find on the beach are very dead and decayed. They're like the skeleton that's left behind. Echinoderm. What about this one? It's kind of a silly picture. I think it reminds me of Grover from Sesame Street. It's a sponge. Porifera. What about good old Mr. Krabs? Good old Mr. Krabs. It's a crustacean, which is a arthropod. Last one. This is a sea anemone where Nemo lives. Cnidarian. It's like that upside down jellyfish. All right, good. Well, that concludes our benthic notes. We're going to do some fun labs where you get to see and hold some of the shells left behind by some of these species. And hopefully this will help you identify them. And when you go to the beach, now you can tell all your family and friends what each of these things are. All right, I'll see you again next time for when we start jumping into actual animals that you might be interested in, like fishes and marine mammals and things like that.